Welcome to Talent Titans, the podcast where we bring you entrepreneurs and leaders from the global staffing industry. I'm your host, Suki Sodi. Now let's jump right on in and welcome today's Titan. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Talent Titans. We are talking with Angela Baade today, and we're going to be talking about leadership, but leadership with empathy. So before I go any further, Angela, do you want to introduce yourself to those that don't know you?
Fantastic. Yes. Hello, Suki. It's great to see you again. So I am based in New York City. I work for a woman-owned staffing agency that's been in the industry for over 40 years. We specialize in all verticals that have to do with office workers. So we work with support staff, with HR, with finance, and also with the creative and digital media as well. We staff on a temporary basis as well as a direct hire basis. And while we are based in New York City, that's where our headquarters is, we provide staffing services to our clients across the country as well.
Amazing. And how long have you been with the company?
I've been with the company for 17 years. We
Wow.
joke that I am the temp that never went away.
So I want to talk about leadership, and leadership's a subject that you can talk about forever. And now it's leadership with empathy. Mm-hmm. But over the last 12 months or so, and this was really evident at Staffing World last month, many leaders, including yourself, have had to carry underperformers. A number of different reasons, the economy and so forth. Can you share the reasoning behind you making this decision and how empathy factored into that?
Absolutely. I think first I want to define in this context, I'll be speaking about underperformers as the people we are choosing to retain and that we are working to engage to retain, who are in the process of developing their skills as recruiters. They might not necessarily be hitting the targets that we set for them this year, but the supporting activity that is required of the job in order to set yourself in a position to have potential success exists, right? So they're doing the work. They're pivoting into new specialties as we need to based on the demands of the market. They are inquisitive. They are working to adapt to the strategies when we encounter different buying behaviors and different outcomes with the client interactions. They're hitting their client presentations every week without fail. So I think it's really, really important to understand these are not people who haven't invested time in their own development during a challenging year. They are people who are digging in, trying to squeeze whatever they can out of this lemon that is 2024. But with regard to the decision to retain this talent, it's really for us, it's straightforward. Objectively, they're invested in their development and we're invested in their development. And we see every single indicator that as the market starts to shift, please let it be in 2025.
It will be.
They're going to be incredibly successful. And the results of their hard work this year, developing grit, developing resilience, and learning how to be more agile in the space is going to really allow them to cash in on it. And subjectively speaking, we also care a great deal for these people. So we wouldn't want to not figure out a way to retain them in a tough year. That would be, I think, a bad business decision, because that wouldn't set us up for success moving forward. So
yeah, I like how you've defined underperformer, but I would really like is this is two-way traffic, right? The individual also has an obligation to do everything they can to keep their job. And I'm talking within the realms of reasonability, right? But, if you're not turning up, you're not even trying, then why should an employer have to carry you or choose to carry you? So I really like how you've defined the difference. And 2024 was a horrible year, right? For the industry. We're certainly seeing now, what is it today? As we're recording this, November 19th. We're starting to see a little bit of positivity, little bit of confidence come in. And when I say confidence come in, just people are just beginning to feel a little better,
Yeah.
right? So I have no idea whether that's going to carry through, but certainly I choose to believe. Well, put it this way, can't get any worse, can
Right.
it?
Well,
Right?
2020 was pretty bad, Suki. So,
Yeah, okay, fair point, but
yeah,
that's
yeah.
just a memory now, right?
I think I also am in the camp of believing that it's going to get better. And I think that's where the empathy with
Yep.
meeting these people that we're working to retain comes into play. They haven't necessarily been through the ups and downs, especially if they're newer to the industry. Maybe like we have some recruiters within our team that joined in 2022 or just
Wow,
before
okay.
2022, right? So they had this incredible boom, and they started when it was hard in different ways, but in some ways it was easy. It was 2022 was a great year for most companies, at least here in the US. And those of us who've been around the block a few more times, it's our obligation to understand the frustrations that they're feeling, acknowledge them, but then help them move through them and past those frustrations. And that's where the empathy, I think, really comes into play, both as a leader and as a coworker,
Yep.
for each other. It's from the top and from the side as well.
Yeah, the downturn, let's call it that, used to be, and I'm showing my age here, every 10 years or so, right? You could pretty much predict, okay, now it feels like it's happening every couple of years, right? That uncertainty. But it's still a great industry to be in. And the other thought that was going through my mind as you were talking is you've chosen to look at these individuals as human beings, not as a number on your P&L. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, so many companies just say cut bottom 20%, bottom 50%, whatever that number looks like. So kudos to you for really looking at it and saying, no, we're going to do what's right by the business and by the people. So that takes me nicely into my next question. How do you strike that balance between showing empathy for your team's struggles and really setting clear expectations?
Well, first of all, I think balance changes every day,
Hmm.
and it's really hard to find. So, if anybody has figured out the magic key to that, please let me know. But I think because in theory it's easy to do this, right? You balance it, but it's it's really hard, and you have to first start with understanding and being empathetic to the frustrations, like I mentioned earlier. Denying that the frustrations exist does not benefit anybody at all. But I think my job as a leader is to help them find balance by hearing the frustration and then helping them work through it and finding the solutions to the frustrations and to the challenges, help them find alternate ways of doing things, of pivoting, maybe reframing their mindset. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to helping someone through the frustrations in an empathetic way, but also in a constructive way, because you can't just sit there and listen to somebody complain,
Yep.
because that's not productive, right? We still have to move toward revenue. Is thinking about the things that you can control and the things that you can't. And I think we were all really inspired by Molly Fletcher's keynote at Thrive
Yep.
a few weeks ago. She was
Yep.
incredible. And I remember seeing the slide up on the screen with the circle that she drew, and she wrote the word focus in it. And then the things that are outside of the circle you don't focus on. So you put the things that you can control in that circle. And the things that you can't control, you can't devote any energy to, because it's just a waste. You're going to burn yourself out on things that you can't control. And the things that are in that circle for a recruiter that we need to help them understand as leaders are those activity levels, those baseline activities, like how many phone calls you're making, how many candidates you're talking to, how many candidates you're submitting to your clients. And when you zero in on what you can control, which are those things, then you have the ability to structure those constructive conversations. And then it becomes a little bit more about math and about statistics and, basically it's logic. So you can pair the empathy with the logic, and there's a bridge between the two. And you have to help people bridge the gap between what they're feeling and then simply what they just need to do.
Okay, so that all makes sense to me. When you say frustrations, what kind of frustrations are you talking about? Because I do agree with you. Sometimes people just need to be heard or feel as if they're being heard, but you can't
Mhm.
let them, you can't sit there, right? You can't sit there. You know, they say sit in discomfort. Well, in some cases, sitting in discomfort and doing nothing, it's crazy, right? So, what are some of the frustrations that you've been hearing? Could you share some of them with the
Absolutely. I it's a lot of it has to do with the speed with which hiring managers are making
oh,
decisions, with which
yeah.
clients are making decisions. There, everybody is very measured in what they choose to do, including bringing on new staff. I mean, it takes us a long
Yep.
time typically to decide to hire somebody. We want to see that everything is there, and because we recognize the time and the financial investment to onboard someone, and our clients I think are feeling that same way. It's the time. We've definitely seen that extend out this year. That's not something we can control entirely. Sure, you can be a persuasive salesperson and let the clients know you're going to lose out on a candidate.
Yep.
We've actually been seeing people not care. They don't care if
Yeah.
they lose the candidate because they think there's going to be another great one around the corner, which may or may not be true in some cases, especially when you're working on positions that are a little bit more unicorns.
Yep.
The other thing that we are seeing is that the job is changing throughout the cycle of the job. So we might do an intake on January 1 and the job is X, Y, and Z. By the time we get to February 2nd and the job is still open, we've now had a shift in what the client is looking for with that candidate. So from the recruiting perspective, the frustration is that you feel like you're going back to square one
Yep.
and you have to retool that search and go back out to market and source people and engage people. And then sometimes that happens an additional time. So this is what people are seeing. They can't control that the client's business needs have changed, but they can control that they're going to just keep going back to the search, retooling it, listen to the client, understand the signals that they're receiving, and go back and do the work. And then it goes back to what's that baseline activity that you need in order to be able to make the placement.
Yeah, and we're talking clients. Candidates are doing the same. Candidates are
Absolutely.
changing their mind. And we're seeing, and this is generalization, but we're seeing even what we do, we recruit for the recruiting industry.
Hmm.
And we're seeing people on this side of the fence do the same. And they should know better. So they're the ones that are out there saying never take a counter offer and things like that. And that's what they're doing. So I think there's an element of fear, I think, plays into it on both parties, whether it's the client
Hmm.
or the candidate. And I think with clients, you touched on something interesting earlier, seeing they don't care if they lose the candidate, right? And we're seeing that happening more and more. And I think there is this belief, and again, I've got nothing to back this up, but if you don't take this job, the next person's going to take it. Or, you know what? Well, we dodged a bullet and now we saw that candidate. We're going to change the spec. So sometimes what they're doing is they're using that actual example and saying, okay, you know what? We're changing the whole spec because we really like that about that candidate. We really like that about that candidate. We're putting it together. Here you go, Mr. Recruiter. Now go and find us this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that this is a theory that I haven't really tested, but I think we are such Amazon shoppers now, and you have 1,000 choices for the item
Yep.
that you want to buy. And I think that there is something that's a little bit lost in the individuality that each candidate brings to the table now.
Yep.
And there's an impression that there's a million people out there that could fill a job. There's an impression that there are a million jobs out there that might be great for you. And I just don't see that in the numbers that we're getting. I just
Yeah.
don't, there aren't as many job opportunities that are truly attractive job opportunities. There aren't that many unicorn candidates out there. I
No.
believe every candidate should have a job and every company should have a candidate for their, I think there's a match out there, but
Yep.
sometimes it's not, we don't buy in bulk when we staff.
Excuse me. And I think also, and I don't want to digress too far, but candidates have this misconception, well, if the client wants me, they're going to pay for me. If they want I'm going to, I only want fully remote. Companies are now bringing people back into the office, more of a hybrid, right? So I
Hmm.
think it's a really interesting crossroads. It's all about the communication, right? So now let me go to my next question. What has been your most effective communication techniques to transition from empathy driven support to a performance driven mindset?
That's a toughie because I think that's really tied up in a lot of different aspects of how we manage our teams and our companies.
Uh-huh.
I think that improving internal communication, and that's not necessarily a technique, but it's something that we have to focus on. When everybody's making money and successful, the rifts in communication, the rifts in process, the friction that develops, those that hides, right? That
Yep.
hides beneath the pile of money that you're bringing in because you're successful in your job or small stack of dollar bills. The rifts and the friction comes out when everybody's having a hard time. We've talked about the blame game a lot. And I think if we have to drive empathy internally among coworkers, because everybody has their position as to why something might have gone wrong and why something is hard. And a salesperson hears a recruiter saying this is a hard job to recruit for differently than the recruiter hears a salesperson saying this is a tough job, but I think you can do it. Right?
Yeah.
They hear things differently because they come from different perspectives. So
You're not looking hard enough.
exactly. So it becomes criticism, it becomes contentious. And I always invite people to put themselves in the other person's shoes and think about why they might be asking for, say, a status update. Why do you need to be accountable to your coworker for the work that you do? It's because you're in it together. But they
Yep.
don't always see it as in it together when they're having to meet personal metrics.
Yep.
So I think fostering an environment where everybody is supportive and accountable to each other because there is empathy helps drive that teamwork and the accountability to the metrics that we set for them, to the goals that we set for them. So and as leaders, we also need to reinforce the positives and the successes, right? Because that's what if you don't get an attaboy or an attagirl because you made a placement, you at least need to get an attaboy or an attagirl because you hit your client submission target for that week, right? So you
Yep.
still have to find the wins to celebrate along the way. So I think that that's actually been the from a leadership perspective, celebrating the wins with regard to the activity that they need to be achieving and the activity levels that they need to be achieving. That's where that technique comes in. You've got to find the wins even when it looks a little bit sad and bleak out there.
How do you balance that with, okay, great job, and then go and push for more? Because it's like, great job, but we need more. So, how do you get that across? Because the way I've said that, it almost makes the celebrating the win fake, superficial, not authentic, right? Because what we really want is that extra number. We want that extra client meeting. We want that extra job on. We want that extra 2 points on the terms, or whatever that might look like.
Mhm.
So how do you make sure you've balanced that? Because in my role, I see so many leaders in this industry try that, and it's almost like great job, and then there's a punch because you didn't do enough,
Yeah.
right? How do you, so people listening to that, listening to us, beg your pardon, what would you say to them? How can they reframe their own mindset? Because it's a mindset issue for them.
Right. Well, it does have to be based in the numbers.
Yep.
So if you're really clear about what success looks like, you can go back and look at those numbers on a weekly basis and say, okay, you had 12 client submissions last week. That meant that you had 6 first interviews the following week. Look how great that sets you up to make placements 2-3 weeks from now, right? So if you have good metrics and good analytics along the way, and look, this is a work in progress, given
Yep.
all of the different tools that we have, making them relevant to your business, but it's worth putting in the blood, sweat, and tears to do that, because then you have the numbers to frame the conversations about feelings. And then you also have the diagnostic information that you can use to figure out where the pieces might be missing. You can take a look at, what clients have you sent 50,000 candidates to and they haven't hired a single one. So maybe we shouldn't be focusing on work with that client. So that's also the job of leadership. You have to look at the activity numbers as they actually tie directly to revenue and figure out where the breaks are within that. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah.
the balance is in the structure of your metrics and your
Well,
KPIs.
yeah, what I would, and I totally agree with everything you just said there, is it's data is data, but you can manipulate the data, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
So I think for those listening to this and who are on the other end, so they're not doing so well on their own activity,
Right.
learn to read your numbers. What is it really, really telling you?
Right.
Because if you're smiling and dialing to hit your outbound,
Right.
but then there's nothing thereafter. You've got to be honest with yourself. That's a you issue, not a them issue. You've got to look at it and say, what's happening here? What am I saying on these calls or not saying on these calls? Am I talking to the right person? So I think what I want to get across here is, yes, leaders leading with empathy and everything. But I think as individuals, we've got to get better at understanding our own numbers and
Absolutely.
reading our numbers.
I think the low hanging fruit of helping recruiters, especially, and I manage recruiters more than I manage salespeople. So that's this
Yeah.
perspective from which I'm speaking, is the low hanging fruit is when you go on vacation and you have a week with no activity, what does your desk look like 3 weeks later?
Yeah.
Right. So, and when you have that aha moment with a recruiter, then you can take that aha moment and attach it to a week when they just weren't dialed in. Now, you weren't dialed in last week. You've got to pump it up this week. Otherwise, you're going to have a really cruddy week 3, 4 weeks from now. Next month you're going to feel the pain next month because you weren't dialed in last week. Remember when you went on vacation? What happened? You were ostensibly on vacation last week. So there are even for a less analytical person, you can tie some really obvious connections. You can create some connections for them from the data to how
Yeah.
they're feeling, because it's about here's how you're feeling based on the data that happened 2, 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And I encourage everyone, whether your company does this or not, pull your data. Pull your data from the last quarter, take a look at it, look at the results. You can draw a line. I
Hmm.
can lie to myself, as in I can fake my numbers, all the rest of it, right?
Hmm.
But ultimately, if you fake the front end, that it just makes your numbers even worse because you cannot fake the results. It's
Correct.
either a placement or it's not, whether it's temp or perm, right? It either happened or it didn't. So I would encourage everybody, look at your own data, pull it. What is it really telling you? Self-analyze.
Yeah.
And if it's a training need, put your hand up and ask for it. Because any leader that is truly, truly leading with empathy is going to be like, great, right. You've
Right.
identified it. Fantastic. Because it's much easier when someone comes to you, or one of your recruiters comes to you and says, Angela, I'm struggling. I need some more training in this area. I've identified that this is my area that I need training. I'm sure you, like me, are like, fantastic.
Right.
It's much easier to help somebody in that
Right.
place.
Right. There's always a story behind the numbers,
Yeah.
and that's why it's not black and white. And yeah, and in a tough year, if you're not raising your hand and asking for help, then I don't know what you're doing in this business,
Yeah.
right? And looking for answers on your own as well.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. So, okay. So, talking of looking for answers and lessons learned, reflecting on this experience, what insights or lessons have you gained about balancing empathy and accountability then?
it's hard, Suki. It's really hard. That's what I've learned. It's
It is.
hard.
It is.
Look, I think we just were talking about data. When it comes to the accountability that you need to have, you can never be too clear or too consistent about what you expect from people. But when you are clear and you are consistent, And you pair that with genuinely caring about the people that you manage or that you lead. You can ask them for a lot. If the empathy isn't there, if the genuine care is not there, then you're going to hit a wall when it comes to asking them to do extraordinary things in a tough year. And I think as I was reflecting on what we were going to talk about today, I really come back to we're in the business of working with humans.
Yep.
Companies are made up of humans. Humans go work at companies. Candidates are humans. And I think that when you excel, at least at Gaynor, the people who excel at recruiting for the spaces that we are in are really strongly intelligent. They're feeling people. And that allows them to understand what a successful match looks like. But because they are highly feeling people, they also feel really deeply and they care really deeply. So the care that they extend to their candidates is also what makes it sting when things don't work out, or
Yep.
when a candidate backs out of a job or ghosts you the night before, which luckily we don't experience very much. But, I think this year, raise your hand if you didn't have a candidate not show up to a job, right? That they were placed on either as a temporary employee or a direct hire employee. But lessons learned are you can't ignore the feelings, but you have to help people move through them. And consistency, consistency when it comes to the numbers that you expect them to be putting on the board for activity.
I love that. You have to help them move through it. You can't deny because your feelings are your feelings, right? I may not agree with your feeling, but that doesn't dismiss your feeling. So if you really are leading with empathy, it's being able to recognize that and exactly what you just said, help them work through it,
Hmm. And
right?
sometimes that's just defining what you shouldn't be caring about and
Yep.
giving somebody permission. Okay, I see that you are feeling a lot about this. I feel that I see that you care a lot, but let's stop almost performing that we care,
Yep.
because the fact that you're performing care, there's a lot of performativity involved, especially in New York. We're
Yep.
loud. We tell you what we think, but there's
Yep.
also a sense of if I show you how much I care and how disappointed I am, then you're going to believe me that I did everything I could have done
Ah, good point.
to create success. Stop performing it and just go do the work. And that sounds not very empathetic, but at the same time, you have to invite people to kind of relinquish their feelings in a very gentle way, and kind of release them from the bonds of the performativity
Yep.
of their feelings as well.
I think, yeah, you're right. Because I always say to people, look, we're in the people business, crap happens, people change their mind, right? Whatever stage they're changing their mind up. It hurts, it stings. Company didn't give that candidate you really liked the job, they were really relying on it. They had a family to feed. That stings. You were relying on that commission check because you were going to go, I don't know, put a deposit on a house or something. That stings. But you can't, if it's happened in the morning, go for a walk after lunch, start again,
Shake it
right?
off.
Yeah, shake it off. It happened. Do not bring it back to work the next day. Takes me into my next question. I want to talk about handling resistance. How do you approach the conversation with your employees, though, who may struggle to adapt to this shift in expectation? So, what I mean by is, okay, so for the last year, you, for lack of a better word, you carried us and this activity was acceptable. Now you're asking us to do this. How do you manage that?
At that point, you've taken care of the empathy part, right? Like
Yep.
you have been understanding, but then at a certain point, it comes back to the math. It comes back to the numbers, and it's not personal. And we are not in this business to not make placements. If you're not placing people, chances are you're not aligned with the core purpose of the company you're working for. And at Gaynor, our core purpose is to change lives by aligning company growth with career success. through the staffing and recruiting services that we provide. So if you are not staffing and recruiting and providing people with jobs at our client companies, then you're actually just not doing the core part of our job. And that becomes really straightforward and not personal. It's just, it's facts and it's logic. And then you have to step away from the excuses, step away from the empathy. I understand that you have a lot going on, but we've talked about your numbers. We've talked about what it takes to be successful. And we've also talked about the goals and the targets that you need to hit to be successful at gain or staffing in this industry. And if we go enough time where those things aren't being hit, we're no longer able to provide you a place to work because you're not doing the core function of the job. I
Yeah,
mean,
because
it's not personal and it's tough. And the reality is that person, though, because you've been consistent with your expectations all along the way, they should know before they walk in the door. And I'm actually quoting one of our consultants this. They should know before they walk in that door that they're going to be losing their job that day.
yep. And that's what I was going to say, because ultimately it's not a not for profits, right? So that's different. And I always say this, look, there's never an unlimited bank account, right? You may not have made placement in 6 months, but guess what? Your salary got paid, your benefits got paid, the lights, the rent,
Mm-hmm.
all the rest of it, right? There is a huge cost to that. And at some stage, money runs out and everybody loses. Or as leaders, we have to make that tough decision and say, time to call it an end with this particular person, right? And nobody should ever be surprised when they get let go.
Right.
That's that. It doesn't matter what role you're in. You should never be surprised if you are let go for performance where you know the outcome. And in our world, it's, and I'm oversimplifying it, maybe not, but it's you either made placements, hit your targets, or you didn't.
Correct.
And I don't mean one, I'm not comparing 1 month over the next, right? Because everybody has a bad month.
Right.
I'm talking that consistency. So, my last point, sustaining empathy with results, right? So, as you move forward, how do you ensure that empathy remains a core part of your leadership while you're driving your team to deliver results? How do you make sure that empathy piece is sticking and it's now become part of the normal, everyday language leadership style?
I think it does come down to caring. It comes down to caring about yourself first, because leading with empathy takes a tremendous amount of energy on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
When we are depleted as leaders, there's no way that we can show the balance and the consistency with regard to what we expect and pair that with empathy. You know, you're gonna get really, really out of whack in terms of the balance if you are not taking care of yourself first. And you and I talked about that a little bit too last week. So I think you just have to keep striving for the balance every day, Suki. You don't figure it out one day and then it's like ready made for the rest
Yep.
of the year, right? You have to keep rebalancing every single day. And I think continuing to, I don't know, I think the sustainability comes in making sure that you're doing what you love. I think that's really important too. I love
Yep.
recruiting. I love working with clients. I love finding them the right talent, but I really, really, really love to see my team successful. And I think that they know that. I hope that they know that. I expect a lot of myself, and that translates to what I expect from them. So I also don't expect anything different from them than I expect from myself as a leader. So I think that the sustainability of that empathy and driving to results is tapping into those truths every single day and rebalancing and always figuring out what you can do better as a leader to shape the lives of the people that we're there to support. I mean, it's true servant leadership in that respect.
I think you touched on a really, really important point there, and maybe we didn't cover it enough. So I quickly want to circle back before we wrap up. looking after yourself. I see so many leaders burning out, but their teams aren't seeing that because they're putting the okay, it's the saying goes, shit rolls downhill, right? And they're protecting their teams from everything that's going on over there. And they're drinking through a fire hose. So I think it's really important that if you're really going to truly be authentic and lead with empathy, it has to start with yourself. Right? So as leaders, you've got to look after yourself. Doesn't mean you're sitting there making excuses. It's not what I'm talking about. Treat yourself how you're treating your teams. Show yourself that extra bit of compassion. Look after your health, look after your mental well-being, because 2025 is going to be an amazing year, right? You're gonna need your energy for that as leaders. So this has been fantastic. I know we're getting a little bit over time. Is there any final thoughts that you want to wrap up with?
Really, I think leading with empathy is absolutely worth it. I think it creates a company culture for the people that work for you that gives them with their why, right? It helps them with their why. We all have our whys. We've worked through our whys. Help give somebody else their why. Make them understand, not make them. You're not making anybody do anything. Help them understand what it is that they care about and how it guides their work, because I think that's how you create professionals in this industry that stick and are in it for the long haul. And
It's a great industry.
It's worth it. It's really worth it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Angela, thank you ever so much for your time. Now, if people are listening to this and they're like, hey, I want to talk to her about this empathy piece or what she said here, what's the best way for people to get hold of you?
Shoot me an email, message me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Angela Baade. And my email is just angela@gaynor.net. So
fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. Really, really appreciate this and look forward to speaking with you again.
Likewise. Thanks, Suki.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talent Titans, brought to you by Recruitment Professional Forum, where they're building a grassroots community for professionals and leaders in the recruitment industry to collaborate, advocate, and advance the profession. If you liked or were inspired by what you heard, make sure to follow, subscribe, and even leave a review. It lets more talented recruiters like you find the show. Until next time, keep on being a talent titan.